newsroom at 9 o'clock. Labour MP Rushanara Ali has resigned as Homelessness Minister this evening. It comes after reports she evicted her tenants before hiking up the rent on her East London property by £700 a month. LBC's political editor Natasha Clark has more.
Labour are trying to push through this renters' rights bill, which is exactly going to ban landlords from trying to do that. So it will ban them from anybody from trying to sell their property, from relisting it for higher rent less than 6 months after their tenants move out. I think this is obviously becoming a distraction, a row for the government. And Rushanara Ali, in her letter of resignation to the Prime Minister today, has basically said as much. She says, I want to make it clear that at all times I have followed all the relevant legal requirements. And of course, we understand that that is the case. But Labour, of course, going to change the law to tighten up on this kind of behaviour.
The Israeli Prime Minister has said he wants to take control of the whole of Gaza but not govern it. Benjamin Netanyahu has told Fox News he wants to secure Israel's security, remove Hamas and pass the territory to a civilian government. Foreign Affairs analyst Tim Marshall's told LBC this was expected.
Netanyahu was trying to get his ducks in a row, by which I mean his cabinet ministers, to back him on it. There's going to be a cabinet meeting probably later today, and they'll probably sign off on it, because I don't think he would have said that if he didn't think he'd got them in a row.
Well, the UN has previously described reports of a military expansion as deeply alarming. Vladimir Putin says he won't be meeting with President Zelensky anytime soon because he says Ukraine has not met his conditions. But the Russian leader said he will meet Donald Trump in the coming days, possibly in the United Arab Emirates. Ministers say they expect people who've arrived in the UK on small boats to start being sent back to France within weeks. Under a new agreement, they can now be returned in exchange for an asylum seeker with a link to the UK. The first people have been detained today. And the Chancellor says an interest rate cut is good news for house buyers and businesses borrowing to grow. The Bank of England cut the base rate to 4%, its lowest level since March 2023. In the city, the FTSE 100 is closed down 63 points at 9,100. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.15. LBC weather: outbreaks of rain continuing in northwest Scotland and Northern Ireland tomorrow. Sunshine for most in England and Wales, a high of 26 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Henry Riley.
And a very good evening to you. 2 minutes past 9 is the time you're listening to Henry Riley here, in for Ian Dale here on LBC. Nice to have your company. We, of course, had the government's Small Business Commissioner in, taking your calls in the last hour. This hour, pleased to say that Colin Sutton joins me in the studio. He is Reform UK's Police and Crime Czar, advisor, whatever you want to call it, and is also a former Detective Chief Inspector in the Metropolitan Police, best known for the arrest of the serial killer Levi Bellfield. Colin, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Henry.
Firstly, you had a hugely successful career in the police. You have been on tour talking about some of your work. A hugely successful author. Why on earth did you go into politics?
I thought somebody needed to stick their hand up and be counted, to be honest. I think I've never been the sort of person that sits on the sidelines and moans. You know, if you don't like something, try and do something about it. And that's what I'm trying to do. I don't like where we are. I don't like where we are, not just with crime, but as a nation generally. And, thought it was an opportunity to do some good again before I get too old for anything.
When you say you don't like where we are, what do you mean by that?
Just the decline of, the country's been run down for the last 14 years. It's not got any better in the last year. Public services are on their knees across the board, not just the police. And I think there's an awful lot of people in this country that are struggling and deserve better.
Why Nigel Farage? Have you always been, were you sort of an ex-UKIP member, an ex-Conservative member? Why him?
I was a Conservative member in my teens, and obviously then when I joined the police service for 30 years, I couldn't take part in politics, so didn't.
You didn't rejoin after you retired?
I did rejoin very briefly, just so that I could vote against Theresa May in the leadership election, and just for that reason only.
OK.
But the Conservatives really have, left me rather than me leaving them, I suppose. I felt, I'd continue to vote for them as the least worst option, I suppose. And really felt coming up to last year's election that, I couldn't bring myself to vote for either of them, and so started looking at reform, and here I am.
And what's he got, you think, Nigel Farage? Why is he the man to, if he becomes Prime Minister, you presumably want him to be Prime Minister, what's he going to do to sort out the problems that you talk about? I
think he's got the... Leadership's a big thing for me. Yeah, I always say that about my own career, that I'm prouder of being a good leader than I am of being a good police officer. And I think leadership's important. I think he can show that. He's a great communicator. And I tell you, as I've realised in the last couple of weeks, when you sit next to him and he answers 19 questions from 19 journalists, and he's got mastery of all the facts, and he's eloquent and articulate in his replies, you realise that there's a lot going on in that head. And, I think he deals with politics in a way that no other politician at the moment does.
Do you worry he's divisive?
I worry about division generally. I don't think he's the only divisive person. I think there's division throughout our society, and it's one of the things I don't like. And I think ironically, the efforts to try to heal divides actually end up being more divisive. And I'm very much a meritocrat, I suppose. I think people, best person, best job, and that's where we should be. I think there are too many people who are so-called community leaders who rely upon division for their status and for their living in some cases. They actually don't... It's not in their interest to heal divisions because otherwise they've not got a role.
OK, now you were, of course, at the podium a few weeks ago being unveiled as Reform's police and crime advisor. Reform say Britain is lawless. Colin Sutton's here to take your calls this hour, 0345 6060 973. To reiterate, he is Reform UK's new police and crime advisor and a former detective chief inspector in the Metropolitan Police. Let's go first to Andreas, who's in Loughton. Hello, Andreas.
Hi, how you doing, Henry? You all right?
Yeah, good. What's your question to Colin Sutton?
Firstly, just want to say congratulations on your career tackling serious crime.
Thank you.
I just want to highlight, firstly, that the construction industry has the highest rate of suicide, and along with the 46,000 reported tool thefts in 2023 is a serious issue in the trade. So my question would be... How would you support reclassifying tool theft to a more serious crime? And what are your thoughts on clamping down on the resale of stolen tools at car boot sales?
Thanks, Andreas. I was speaking to the Met about this a few weeks ago in a piece for Nick Ferrari's show, and this is a huge issue. People having their vans effectively looted, losing thousands and thousands of pounds. Colin Sutton?
Yeah, I mean, do you know, Andreas, that's really shocking. You talk about those suicide figures, and I can understand it. I'm shocked by it, but I can understand it because these crimes are terrible, pernicious crimes in the sense that they take somebody's ability to earn their livelihood away from them, and I think that's the big thing with it. And I guess I understand insurance is very difficult to get now as well for tools and vehicles. And I saw something the other day on telly with a man who literally loads and unloads his van every single day when he goes to work and gets home again. It puts another 3 hours on his working day, but he does that so that he's still got his tools. I'm not a great one for saying reclassify or to strengthen the laws. Do you know, I think we've got enough laws. I think many of the laws in this country just aren't enforced and aren't used properly. And there is no question that the theft of tools, like the theft of anything from a motor vehicle, is a serious offence and should be prosecuted and could be prosecuted. And the aggravating factors in terms of what that means for somebody's livelihood as a result of that theft ought to mean that the criminal justice system treats it as seriously as it ought to. In terms of I think the only times in my life I've ever been to a car boot sale were when I was working, when I was up in Yorkshire. I worked in Yorkshire for 4 years, and we had an initiative at car boot sales then because the tool theft thing was big, and that's 30 years ago, very nearly.
Yeah.
So it's a real issue. Like so many things the police do, it comes down to resources and the fact that since 2010 they've lost so many officers. They've got officers doing things, sitting at hospitals looking after mental health patients and all sorts of other things. 70% of these officers' time is not dealing with crime, and that needs to change, and that would free up some time for the officers to go and do that sort of proactive work. There is no time for that sort of proactive work now. But I think the issue about the suicides is one that I'll look into, because that kind of puts it onto a higher plane for me. I hadn't realised. I can see why it makes that difference, but I'd never realised that, and I'm grateful to you for highlighting that, Andreas. Thank you.
Andreas, last word from you on that?
Yeah, well, obviously, like I said, look, between the United, Stolen Tools, UK, like, we are doing our part. We know this is like a joint venture to try and deter these thieves. Like, it's such a worse sort of crime, but it really is two different leagues. When you're stealing from a tradesperson over stealing from a car, and you just lose whatever from that, that's a minor crime. Like, the repercussions that happen when you have your livelihood taken, it's uncomparable. Like, it is a serious thing. But obviously, that's why we are trying to push for the law to be changed and to clamp down on the car boots, because this is where the thieves are finding their outlets.
Okay.
Anything that they can sell in cash, they just find their route. But,
Colin, you wanted to come in again, Colin?
All I wanted to say, Andreas, was thank you again. Find me on Instagram, Twitter, whatever your social media is. Send me a message, and if I can help you and get involved with your movement, I would, because it's worth doing.
We'll get back to that. Robert Jenrick, the Conservative Shadow Justice spokesperson, did a video where he was at a car boot and he was looking at how they are sort of you've got markings, haven't you, on some of these tools that police are now looking at. He also did another video, which you may have seen, with regards to fare dodging on the underground. What did you think of that?
It's a real issue. There's a sense of injustice and unfairness in it, isn't there? You know, it's an interesting kind of development, I think, with politicians. I saw Chris Philp was in the Channel on a boat yesterday, although Nigel had done it about 3 weeks before. But it's interesting, isn't it? I think it's a response by politicians to the sort of citizen journalists, the way that people can use social media now to make a point.
Is it helpful if you're a copper and you've got Robert Jenrick coming down, stopping fare dodgers?
Yeah, I don't think it's unhelpful. I've not got a problem with him doing it. I think some people would say it's a gimmick, but he's using his position to highlight a real issue, and it is a real issue because season tickets are expensive, and people who dodge paying them, cause disquiet. And I don't have a problem with him doing it.
Can we talk about immigration? Because there's quite a few texts, messages coming in on that particular subject. Reform UK are calling for suspects to have their ethnicity identified. What would that achieve?
Well, I understand. It would today. It seems it would achieve that you'd be in tune with the Home Secretary, because she's come out this evening and said that it ought to be done. I think when we saw what happened at Southport and the kind of rumour mill that went into overdrive on social media caused real problems. And I think, to their credit, Merseyside Police learnt from that when we had him, I think it was May the 26th, was it, the Liverpool FC
There was an incident parade,
and what was his name? Paul Doyle, I think his name was. And he was named less than 3 hours after the incident. They said, this is a white British man from this area. And they sort of squashed any rumours by doing that. The trouble is that they then set a bar, they then say, we can do this. And all these arguments about integrity of the prosecution and contempt of court and so forth were really scuppered completely by them doing that. And then you come to what happened last week in Warwickshire, where the opposite's gone on, and you sort of say, well, hang on, which way is it? What should we be doing?
Well, those are two live. I know in Warwickshire it's a live case. Similar to Paul Doyle was going before Crown Court, so we can't talk about those specifically. But in terms of the actual premise of it, what I wouldn't understand is if Nigel Farage spoke the other week about Afghans, for instance, or certain ethnicities and the propensity for crime or the statistics. As a citizen of London, what would that do for me? Does that mean I avoid all Afghans?
No, I don't think it's telling you to avoid Afghans, but I think it's right that the public should know the truth and should know. I've always been of the view that there are such things as objective truths, and if those truths are unpleasant or unpalatable for certain people's views or opinions, then
But what are we getting at when we're getting people's ethnicities? Just because, people who commit crime have done something wrong. Why do we need to know where they've come from?
Because the state that successive governments have got us into now, where there's disquiet about the number of immigrants we have, mostly illegal immigrants, but some people also with legal immigration as well, means that people perceive that there is a risk because these people come from different cultures, where they have a different view of women, where they're whatever. And therefore they see that risk, and if they think that a crime has happened and it's going to be somebody from that group and their warnings, if you like, about the risk of being unheeded, then they get angry about it. And that's what happened in the wake of Southport. And Southport could have been, the effects of what happened after Southport could have been lessened had there been more openness, I think, at the beginning.
In saying that he was a Christian?
Yeah, saying that he was Christian, what we saw was he's a choir boy from Wales, which was kind of true, but a distortion of the facts in some ways. But I think there needs to be consistency, and I think that I don't like to see chief officers hiding behind, it's there's no guidance to say we've got to do it. Presumably now the Home Secretary's come out, all the chief constables think, well, I've got something covering my back now because the Home Secretary said we can do it, so if I do it, it won't harm my career in the future. I don't like that. I want to see leaders lead.
Is that releasing details on charge, on arrest?
Well, traditionally, you've said that a person and an age has been arrested, and then on charge they're normally named and their location, their address given. That's the way things traditionally went in terms of release of information to the media. Sometimes, particularly in sexual offence cases or where there were other considerations, they would be withheld, but they were under pretty strict sort of guidelines and there were circumstances where you do that. But the traditional formula is a 32-year-old man has been arrested and in custody and the investigation continues, and then, John Doe of such and such an address has been charged. That's how it goes. I don't see any reason to stop that.
OK, that's enough from me. More calls coming in. We'll come back to those in just a second. Colin Sutton, Reform UK's police and crime advisor, with me in the studio here until 10 o'clock. 0345 6060 973.
This is LBC. This is LBC with Henry Riley. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
Colin Sutton, Reform UK's police and crime advisor, here taking your calls. He's also the former Detective Chief Inspector in the Metropolitan Police, known for the arrest and serial killer of Levi Bellfield. Before I come back to calls on that, you might have seen this a few days ago, Colin. There was an article in the Daily Mail that Levi Bellfield now has an Xbox in his cell and is, because he's classed as a certain type of prisoner, he's allowed to have a fry-up every Saturday. He killed 3 people, as you very well know. What's your thoughts on that?
Interesting. Since he's converted to Islam, I wonder what he fries up. But I don't think.
He has halal. I am told he has halal options, but he's allowed a fry up.
Yeah. Look, it's not for me to say. The prison regime is dealt with by prison officers and people who think that they have to manage these people who are there. I understand it's difficult to manage people who have got no expectation of release. I think a lot of people listening to this and a lot of people out there would think that that's wrong, that somebody like him has treats like that. And where you've got somebody like him who's serving 4 whole life tariffs, there is no chance of rehabilitation. So if he has a pretty unpleasant time, then I don't think anybody would cry many tears about it, and I certainly wouldn't.
No. Thank you, Colin. Adam's in Beverley and Hull. Hello, Adam.
Hello, Henry.
Hi.
Hello, Colin.
Hello, Adam.
First of all, hello there. First of all, Colin, congratulations on your achievements.
Thank you. I had good teams.
Yeah, my question is, judging by the situation with our prisons in the UK, which seems to be bulging with prisoners, and there seems to be chaotic at the moment, the situation with prisons. What's your view on deporting a lot of these foreign prisoners, which make up quite a lion's share of prisons in the UK, deporting them back to their own country rather than the British taxpayer paying for their accommodation and food and everything, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay.
And I just wanted to see what your view was on that.
It's just shy of 10%, isn't it, I think, of the prison population?
It's not just my view, Adam, it's a reform view as well. We've got 87,000 prison places in this country. We've now got 88,500 prisoners in there. Something like 10,400 of those are foreign nationals. Our policy, and I agree with it wholeheartedly, is that every single one of those should be deported back whence they came, and that would then free up 10,400 spaces in our prisons for criminals here, and we wouldn't see this awful business that we've seen from the government, whereby robbers and thieves, and crucially domestic abusers, are released back onto the streets after serving as little as 20% of their sentences. That's not justice for the victims of those crimes. They have an expectation that, it's hard enough to get people before a court and get them convicted of offences like that, and they then get sentenced by the judge, and the government decide that they can serve 20% of their sentence and they're back out again. That should not happen. It will not happen with reform. Talking of prisoners and prisons, there was this idea for Nightingale prisons that Nigel Farage spoke about on disused MOD sites. I mean, is that really the right place to have prisoners, do you think? We've already got uproar when it comes to hotels in certain areas. If people know that their MOD base has got however many violent prisoners there... Yeah, possibly. I mean, I'm not sure that the so-called Nightingale prisons would have the violent prisoners there, because I think the degree of security that you want for your Category A prisoners is probably not something that's easily done at an RAF base. But certainly in terms of open prisons or lower risk offenders, I don't see any problem with that. We saw across the Atlantic that they seem to have created this alligator Alcatraz, as it's called, in 8 days. Although I see some judges made some ruling about it today, so I'm not sure where that goes. But I think it's about doing it quickly if we're going to do it, because, to be quite honest, it would take 8 days to fill the planning forms in this country, wouldn't it, really? Well, there's also your idea to send some prisoners abroad to El Salvador. That was, I mean, if you can offshore it, if you need the space and you can offshore it, then we offshore everything else in this country, it seems, at the moment. So why not offshore our prisoners? At a time where we're trying to reduce the prison population, you might not agree, but with the propensity for short sentences, for example, are we really going to need all of that space? I think if we're successful in fixing the police so that crime eventually comes down, then ultimately the aim's got to be that we don't need the space. But in the meantime, I think we probably, there's going to be a tipping point, isn't there, where you're probably going to have to increase the prison population, and then your successes will then mean that it falls after that. But that's probably an argument for saying let's have temporary structures like a Nightingale prison. But there is a genuine possibility that we would offshore prisoners to El Salvador. I'm not sure El Salvador would want them, but I think... That's the country that Nigel Farage mentioned. He did. I can't speak for Nigel. And he said he hadn't spoken to the government. No, I'm sure he hadn't. But why mention it then? Well, why did Keir Starmer mention to the Albanian president we were going to send immigrants there, but he hadn't mentioned it to him? I mean, I don't know. You'll have to ask him. But the concept of offshoring prison spaces, I think, is a sound one, if that's what we need to do. OK, in terms of the general cost, and look, I appreciate you're not sort of Reform's chief economist, but no. £17 billion was the figure given by Nigel Farage for all of these policing measures. I mean, that's a huge sum of money. That's more than the Ministry of Justice annual budget. Well, it might be. But I think there's going to come a time soon, Henry, when you know, and this is absolutely no disrespect to journalists. I'm very fond of a lot of journalists. That people realise that this isn't the gotcha question that you think it is, because when you look at the way in which government spending, public spending, local authority spending as well, is set up, there is an awful lot on the debit side which is there because it's been there for ages and nobody likes to address it. And the name of the party, Reform, is there for a reason. It's because we want to do things differently. And so, just off the top of my head, you know, at the moment, probably £7 million a day for asylum seekers. Well, if we stop those, then that's
for the hotels.
For the hotels and, yeah, the houses of multiple occupation as well. Something like 13 million for foreign aid. Green subsidies, just off the top of my head. If we start looking at things like that, I'll tell you a story. It's not
going to be easy to turn around overnight, though, Colin, is it? These measures you're talking about, you can't find 17 billion quid off around the back of a sofa. I mean, you've got to be straight with people. Is this going to come through tax rises, or is this going to come through cutting public services? And so far, Nigel Farage is trying to do both.
Right. Look, story. Okay, police officer. She needs to make a presentation. She needs a widget, an adapter to make her computer talk to the screen. She goes online, onto the internal intranet, the intranet, looks at the catalogue. The piece she needs is $49.99 and it's 2 weeks to come. That's too long for her. She gets her phone out, she goes onto her Amazon account, gets the same thing for $4.99 delivered tomorrow, and she's off and running. Now, I'm not advocating that we should make people pay out of their own pockets. Of course not, but they claim it back. If you repeat that tens of thousands of times a day, all over public service in every school,
but
every
Colin,
town
this
hall.
is wheeler-dealer stuff. This is not how you run a government.
It's the way in which our money is tipped down the drain by public services because of the procurement. You remember the things where the NHS was saying, if you've got free prescriptions, please don't ask for paracetamol because it costs us £1.60 and you can buy it for 32 pence in Tesco's. I'm not the only person who thought, well, why?
There are huge problems there, but
why doesn't the NHS go to Tesco's?
Government after government after government trying to cut so-called waste.
No, they haven't. They haven't addressed the procurement. They haven't addressed the waste in dealing with things such as foreign aid, where we've put so much. I mean, we've eaten into it a bit now, haven't we? Because of the defence commitments that we're trying to run to. There are things that are just there on the debit side of the balance sheet for both national and local government, which are there because nobody has questioned them for the last 30 years.
We've got to be straight, though, on the finances, though. And I know I'm not going to bang on about this the whole time, but taxes are... You're advocating for 30,000 more police on the streets.
Yes.
You want to see, something I happen to agree with as well, more police stations opening. When you were a copper, there'd have been 100 police stations in London that were open.
When I retired, there were 136 front counters in London. They're going down to... 20.
We're going down to 20.
Yeah.
It's something we agree on. But it costs money, and taxes are going to have to go up to pay for this. You've got to accept that. You've got to be straight with people.
I'm sure that there are things we can find which will mean that won't have to happen.
But this is it's not just policing, this is in every area. There's promise after promise, and we get told about cutting net zero, we get told about finding money through procurement. I mean, I think if it was that easy, Rachel Reeves would be doing that, wouldn't she?
No, I'm not sure she can do anything that's easy or not, to be honest.
OK, more calls coming in. A few other bits I wanted to get your thoughts on. When I said you were coming on, one particular person called Nigel, funny enough, I don't think it's that one, tweeted about the Hill Carnival. That's taking place later this month. Should that go ahead?
I think it should go ahead in Battersea Park or Hyde Park or somewhere with knife archers and with stewards and paid for by the people who make money out of it. I don't think it should be a multi-million-pound drain on the policing budget in London. I don't think it's outlived its purpose for that in some ways. It's become something that's not the festival it ought to be.
And the organisers say that it will lose all of its sort of value, the culture, the history, if it gets moved to Hyde Park. You say that there's been too many incidents. I think it was last year there were 5 stabbings, or 8 stabbings even.
Yes.
You say it's outgrown its...
I did. I policed it in uniform in the early 90s, and it was grim in those days. it's got worse. It's, I don't understand why we think that it's acceptable because of cultural history to allow crime, assault, drug taking to go on unchecked for 3 days of the year.
When I went to your press conference a few weeks ago, you said that you didn't want to wear your watch because you're worried about it being nicked. You didn't want to get your phone out to order a taxi or whatever it was. When was the last time you felt safe in London?
I could feel reasonably safe when I'm driving a car through London. I am very aware of my surroundings, just walking into here to your studios in daylight, in busy summertime in Leicester Square when there are lots of tourists about, but I'm looking around all the time. I mean, it's a strange thing, that police officers probably have greater fear of crime than anybody else because we know what goes on.
Yeah.
But I certainly don't feel as safe as I used to years ago in London, and I think that it's difficult, isn't it? We have things about our person now that are very valuable and very stealable.
Yeah.
And we didn't have that 30 years ago. We didn't have 1,200 quid worth of phone in our pocket.
On the subject of phones, you might have seen, we spoke about it yesterday, Currys, the retailer, have launched this Mind the Grab campaign where there's a big sort of purple line. What are your thoughts on that? Because part of the conversation yesterday was, is it actually a bit of victim blaming, telling people not to be on their mobile phones?
It is to a degree. Do you know, thieves operate in this area has been a sign that we've seen for decades at various places. I think the way in which it's done, where you have to rely on a shop to do it, I have to say, quite a garish way that I wouldn't choose to do, is a shame. And I think it's a shame that we are having to adorn what's probably the most famous shopping street in the country, if not Europe, with things like that. I'm all for making people aware of the need to take care of themselves and not become victims. I don't think that's victim blaming, and I don't think saying mind the grab is victim blaming, really. I just wish we could do it in a less obvious and more subtle way. I just think that, it looks bad.
We were inundated with calls yesterday on the subject of people having their phones nicked. Colin Sutton's with me, Reform UK's police and crime advisor. More calls in a moment. 0345 6060 973. First, though, slightly late to the news at 9:32 with Daryl Jackson.
Labour MP Rushanara Ali has resigned as homelessness minister. It comes after reports she evicted her tenants before hiking up the rent on her East London property by £700 a month. Benjamin Netanyahu has told US media that Israel intends to take full control of Gaza, but they don't want to keep it. The Israeli Prime Minister says it wants a security perimeter ahead of a meeting with his security cabinet to vote on the plans. It's understood a meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin could collapse unless the Russian president agrees to meet Volodymyr Zelensky. Earlier, the Kremlin claimed Putin and his US counterpart could meet as early as next week. LBC weather, outbreaks of rain continuing in northwest Scotland and Northern Ireland tomorrow. Sunshine for most in England and Wales, a high of 26 degrees.
This is LBC.